Enjoy this presentation because I'm really delighted to share this. But before I do, I just want to make sure that everything is working well. Yeah, I've just got my notes here. Good. Well, this presentation really, when I first discovered it for myself, I was so taken aback because my background is not into Christianity and so forth. I was a Hindu when I first learned what you are learning many, many years ago. Born and raised in South Africa from a Hindu background. And when I was invited for a seminar just like this, and because I had an inquiring mind and wanting to know more about the big issues in life and the things that we wrestle with, where we come from, where we're going, etc., history was something that really resonated with us, with me, my family, and also trying to see what happened in the past. Because let's be honest, if we don't know where we're coming from, we wouldn't know where we're going. Yeah? So it's important to look backward so that we can go forward. All right? So this presentation, I really would love for you to pay particular attention because we're going to see some interesting things here. The last empire. This person by the name of Kaiser Wilhelm is a German. I was speaking to Sabine. You might know you from Germany. I'm sure you heard about this character or this great man, they say. Was a leader in Germany, after in the World War I. After that, he was once asked to pay to repair the roof of a large cathedral, the Metz Cathedral in France. And it's interesting to note what he said. The Metz Cathedral in France is something that's a sight to behold. But during the First World War, this area of France, which was part of Germany, when he was asked to pay for the roof to be repaired, Kaiser Wilhelm said, "Yes, I will do it, but on one condition." Do you know what that condition was? It's amazing. He said, there is a statue of the prophet of Daniel at this church. And he wanted to take the head of the prophet Daniel and put it as a statue on top of this cathedral. And when we do that, or if that is allowed, and you agreed upon, I will repair this cathedral at my own expense. Now, it's very interesting to ask the question, why did this secular leader, Kaiser Wilhelm, bring the prophet Daniel into this whole scenario regarding the church? And that's the million-dollar question. In the early presentation, we learned about how the history or the archaeological verifications and the evidence for what the Bible says is categorically documented in the last presentation from Gary. He made that and he established that point. I hope you followed that because we're going to see this book, Daniel, which is contained in the Bible, bears the blueprint, or not only the blueprint, but confirms what archaeologists and historians, not necessarily Christian or religious scholars, they look at the piece of literature and they verify this with this book called Daniel, and it's something that not confuses, but should cause us to come to this conclusion that maybe the Bible has something to say. Now, how many of you have a Bible at home. You've come across a Bible, isn't it? And I don't know how much you have read the Bible or how much you have experienced reading the book of Daniel, but in this particular book, there is tucked into the story a beautiful picture, which is regarded as a prediction, a dream that we're going to unpack. And so, we know this by our last presentation. The book of Daniel was a favorite book back in the days. The Dead Sea Scrolls, which is ancient documentation that was found in the Middle East by the Qumran community, verifies the authenticity of the book of Daniel. Now, the predictions concerning our own time. There are many predictions made. Some of you are familiar with them. I remember growing up, and it was touched upon Nostradamus. I was listening to your last presentation, and my mind went back to school days when we came across as students this character by the name of Nostradamus. You heard of him? Nostradamus predictions? And we were so enamored by this guy because some of his predictions that he made did come true. And that is why some people and we were excited about what he could say towards the future. But there's certain things that he did predict didn't come to pass. It never really happened. So, is there a prediction that can speak to the future? We're not talking about horoscopes, we're not talking about seances and all those things, but is there authentic predictions that can be verified? And I think we have done some extensive work in our last presentation where Gary just took us through the evidence, establishing some historicity, the historical evidence for that, which gives us some kind of, not faith in the narrative that we're going to look at, but some kind of stability. You know, we can firmly plant our feet on this and say, hang on, there's something that we can look at and make a judgment upon or draw a conclusion and apply that in our very own lives. Because at the end of the day, we want to have the assurance that my life, your life, this world is moving towards a direction. Otherwise, it's just going to be all over the place, and this thing just makes beautiful sense, you know. It just makes me feel good. I want us to have an experience where we can move beyond that, as I have experienced it for myself, and trying to share this information to as many people that I can. So the predictions concerning our own time. What is that? Once upon a time in this chapter, there was this person who had a dream. In the book of Daniel, chapter 2, which is the favorite book of the Essene community who believe to copy these from the famous Dead Sea Scrolls, there in this dream, this king called Nebuchadnezzar was greatly disturbed. Why was he disturbed? What was the reason? Now, the dream omen tablet, as was mentioned in our past history, ancient kingdoms, they wanted to find out the predictions, so they consolidated and consulted with various instruments they had. And it's interesting, they had that liver omen, you know. It's interesting how Gary explained the liver, sort of a cultic practice. But here we find that the dream omen, which was very much a familiar way of looking into the future. If someone has a dream, they bring the magicians and the astrologers, especially the kingdoms. If you're a big shot back in the day, you consult with them and they come up with an interpretation, right? But what was the meaning of that dream is the big question, all right? So, as his advisors, which the astrologers, the magicians, the psychics, they came on board, but they couldn't interpret the dream. Now what we have here is the Babylonian astrology chart in the Louvre Museum. I was doing a bit of reading on this. It's very interesting to know that the current practice of today's modern seance, or those that do palm reading and tarot cards and all those things, how many of you are familiar with them? You don't need to put up your hands because we don't want to know that you consult with these people. But you're familiar with that. It takes us back to Babylonian astrology, the way they interpreted things to make an assessment of the future. Now, some of the things, I was very naughty one day when I was traveling back in Africa. I was born and raised in South Africa, as I mentioned. And there were a few people in the streets wanting to predict the future. And they said, yeah, I can predict your future. In 10 years' time, you will know exactly where you're going. So I was curious, as I'm always curious, to go and just sneak up and there. And I was married. I had 2 children. So I went in there, and she said, show me your palms. I put out my hand. She looked at my palm, and she said, in 5 years' time, you'll be married. And in the next 2 years, you'll have a son. And the following year, you'll have a daughter. But I was already married and already had children. So I knew this could be a game. So I gave a donation of $5. It's an interesting job that you're doing. And I told her, I had a little literature piece of tract explaining Daniel chapter 2. And I said, this will be really good for you. Read this. And I left my contact number. And if you have any questions, just call me. That's another long story I could share at a later stage. But what we're trying to do here is Babylonian courts, systems, back in the day, in Bible times, they had a big role to play in predicting the future. So, did I go that way? Yes. The astrologers and the magicians that were called upon by this king who had this dream, that he couldn't remember this dream and he couldn't find an interpretation, these guys couldn't interpret it and tell the king what he dreamt. So what did he do? He ordered an execution. You guys, I'm paying you for nothing, I'm giving you a big check at the end of the month, and I ask you one thing to do. Just give me the meaning of my dream, what I dreamt, and everything will be good. In fact, I will put you in a prominent position. That's what the king offered. So he ordered the execution. However, there is sometimes, when things go pear-shaped, you tend to reflect and try to come to terms with what's going on. And so this character in the story of Daniel chapter 2, by the name of Daniel, he comes into the scene. And he tries to help the king with this problem. Daniel is a slave in the Babylonian kingdom. This character, this king, King Nebuchadnezzar, went to Jerusalem and he brought, kings in those days, they go out and capture and conquer, and in that conquering takes the spoils and take some people along, so that they can serve in the royal palace and try to build the kingdoms. That's the history of our world, isn't it? We find certain countries, they go out and things like that. That's the history of colonialism. That's what we have lived with, we have experienced, we understand it in our history. No different. So he was an individual that had this gift of understanding dreams. And it revealed and it dawned on him that there was this great statue that this king dreamt about. A statue. But it wasn't just an ordinary statue. This represents something. The head of gold and the chest of silver, bronze, legs, iron, and then suddenly that stone comes and knocks the whole thing down. Just like that. And beyond that is also an astonishing feature. What do you think of that dream? I wonder what he ate that night to have that kind of a dream. I don't know, maybe he had some pizza. I don't know, maybe some curry and rice. They say whatever you eat, it reflects on your dream, but we don't know that if that theory is proven scientifically. But this dream troubled him, and he needed to find some kind of sanity with regards to this. Now, in that dream, this fellow by the name of Daniel was brave enough to come into the scene and stop the execution of his colleagues and save the intelligentsia of the kingdom. And how did he do that? He consulted with a greater power. Of course, he believed in God, Daniel, and he thought that there's no power on earth that can enable him to do anything but to reveal dreams. So what this dream meant or means is the succession of 4 world empires. And that's what we're going to look at, because it has been regarded as the statue, and we're going to see ourselves in this prediction, or what the Bible or this book of Daniel, this manuscript, this section of the Bible regards it as a prophecy. And so we're seeing how a prediction, which is a secular term, can also be regarded as a prophetic term, where you look into the future and see things lining up, which brings us to that last empire, that last kingdom. Is it going to last, or is it going to last forever? Now let's look at this. The head of gold. That's the concept. The king dreamt about this statue, and in that statue is levels of different types of metal. Now, as we go through this prediction or this prophecy, you will notice some key elements featured. If you remember and recall, in the last presentation, made mention regarding animals. And in prophecy or in biblical literature, an animal that is attached to anything represents a kingdom. And here we have a similar pattern, that a metal description represents a kingdom, all right? A power or an empire, so to speak. So the head of gold represented the Babylonian kingdom. What kingdom? The Babylonian kingdom, all right? You are this head of gold. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 38, you can read it when you get home. You will notice this phrase as Daniel is reporting this prediction, this dream to the king. He said, "King, live forever. The dream that you had of this metal man, this statue, you will notice, O king, that the head is full of gold." It's described as gold. "And you, O king, you represent the gold." In other words, your kingdom is the most powerful kingdom. Okay. Notice also in this statue, as you work it down to the toes, the metal imagery in terms of its value decreases. All right? So we have a precious metal of gold, and Daniel says, King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian kingdom, you are the head of gold. All right? Head of gold, Babylon, we'll notice, ruled from 605 to 539 BC. What else? But after you shall arise another kingdom that is inferior to yours. Now, which kingdom is that? Let's find out. The Medo-Persia defeated Babylon in the year 539 BC. Remember, if you recall in the last presentation, all this diggings and all this past evidence now is seen to be paralleled with the book of Daniel. Do you see that? So we're not making this up, dear friend. There's something happening here to see how this book has relevance, even though it was predicted, mentioned hundreds of years before. And we can have confidence for the future, just like how I had confidence in understanding where I'm going, to give me a sense of meaning and direction in my life. So we find Medo-Persia defeated Babylon. They came into Babylon, conquered it. The head of gold is done and dusted now. Now Medo-Persian sits on the throne. But do you think they lasted forever? No, I don't think so. Cyrus comes and he conquers Babylon, of course, Medo-Persia. That's the king of Medo-Persia, and he takes over. You'll notice the evidence of the same thing that's mentioned in the book of Daniel is recorded in the Cyrus Cylinder. You go to the London Museum or the British Museum in Great Britain, of course, and you see that. It's amazing how it just confirms what we are reading in the book of Daniel. So, described as the silver of chest, and that's the Medo-Persian kingdom, 539-31 BC. What else did we see in that dream? Of course, notice head of gold is gone. That was Babylon. Chest and arms of silver, Medo-Persia. That's the ruling. What's going to happen? I think something else is going to happen. We get the gist of what's taking place. Daniel chapter 2 verse 39 says, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. Now, what's the bronze kingdom? Let's look at it. Aha! Do you know Greece defeated Medo-Persia in 331 BC? What are we seeing here, dear friends? You can look at any history book, go to your local library and you pick this information up. It'll confirm what we are discovering in the book of Daniel. The kingdom of Greece defeated Medo-Persia. Alexander the Great defeated Medo-Persia at the Battle of Arbela in 331 BC. Coincidental? I don't think so. The Greek Empire was born. The Greek culture, the Greek Empire gave us the libraries, isn't it? The Greeks were known to collect information and make great discoveries, etc. And they gave us philosophy such as Plato and Socrates, Aristotle, all these great thinkers. There's some Greek artifacts there, and bronze was Greek, 331 BC. What else do we find? Now we go down to the bottom of that statue, and we find that in Daniel chapter 2 verse 40, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, as we say. Rome comes on the scene, defeats Greece in 168 BC. Let's go quickly. Now you remember there was a statement that is in our history. He or she, they rule with their iron fist. And remember, there's a saying that goes like that. The Iron Empire, a very formidable fighting machine. The Romans had this heavy artillery, demonstrating the strength and the power. It can crush iron legs. Rome, 168 to 476 AD. So, dear friends, do you notice what's happening now? We're almost becoming down that statue, isn't it? It's like a telescope pointing us into a direction, and it's moving towards something, and we move down to something else that we find in Daniel chapter 2, verse 41 and verse 42, as Daniel is giving the meaning to this dream to the king. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of the potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. So the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. Okay? Now, how would you describe that? It's interesting. Western Rome was divided. 447, you'll notice all the countries there, the Europe, divided Europe. And it's symbolized in Western Europe as well, division. The iron, clay, and feet represent Western Europe. It's interesting, isn't it, how that dream just fell in place. Head of gold, shoulders, chest, silver, bronze, legs, and the toes that are 10 toes and divided. It's very easy to remember the stuff, isn't it? It's a mental picture. You don't need to, it's simple to understand and easy to remember because of the description. If you're a teacher and you teach this, it's easy because you can picture it, because we are human beings as well. We can conceive of a head of gold, and we can conceive of our chest and shoulders, etc., and go down to our feet. And in the toe section, if you look at your very toes, you notice they're separated. They're not attached. They're divided. And so it's important, and one of the ways I remember it is just like that. The feet of clay and iron represents Europe that's divided, or Western Europe. Now, it continues in verse 43, as you saw iron mixed with clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere one to another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And do you find Europe united, Western Europe? They're wanting to be united now. They want to come together, but the prediction says they will not mix together. How good is that? Is it true? Never to be united into one empire. I don't know what Putin is doing. He thinks he's going to bring it all together, but I don't think so, because of this prophecy that was foretold many, many years ago. Of course, there were many attempts to unite Europe. What were the attempts? Charlemagne, he comes on the scene. There's Louis, there's Napoleon. Remember this famous guy, Napoleon Bonaparte, French? He did make this statement. There will be one Europe, there will be one currency, there will be one language, there will be one government over all of Europe. Did that come to fruition? Did it come to pass? I don't think so. God Almighty is too much for me. Yeah. Amazon made that statement. Well, coming back to this fellow, Kaiser Wilhelm. Am I going? Let me go back. So that's an interesting thing that he did. I'll pay for the repairs of this cathedral on one condition, that I have the statue of Daniel's head on the church. Something very meaningful and powerful about that statement. You remember this guy? One of his dreams was to unite Europe. One people, one empire, one leader. Do you think he accomplished that? They will not stick to one another. They will not come together. Dear friends, do you see something happening? What about trying to unite through marriage relationships. The kingdoms of this world, in order to do business and try to come together, one of the basic ingredients is to marry a kingdom. A king will give the daughter to another kingdom, their son, to marry, so that they can forge relationships. And you know the history very well. They will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. All right. Fredericksburg Castle, they failed. They shall not cleave one to another. United States of Europe failed. A great power is being born. The president of Mitterrand, France, a great power is being born. But do you think that came to pass? The course is irreversible. We can and will succeed in creating a unified, prosperous, democratic Europe where citizens can live in peace and freedom. You just look at Europe today. In fact, not only Europe, look at our world. It sounds good for us to be united, but in terms of what is the essence of unity is the great question, isn't it? Is it united just for politics' sake, or is it united so that we can be free citizens? But the powers that be that are calling for unity, especially if you look in our history, was for one agenda, and that was for power and control. But it doesn't work like that, because the prophecy and the prediction here in Daniel chapter 2 says it will not. Remember this word, Brexit? A few years ago. And then the United Kingdom pulled out of the European Union. Never to be united in one empire. So Daniel revealed the meaning of this dream to King Nebuchadnezzar. And Daniel said, "You watched in this dream while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and of clay and broken them in pieces." We must never forget about that dream, because we can be caught up with just the metal man, but there's something that's in that dream that is hardly spoken about in today's society and world, is the stone that was cut out without hands that struck the image in its feet. Because if we ask a question, where do you see ourselves? Where do we see ourselves in that figure, in that statue? Certainly we don't see ourselves on the head, do we? No, because that kingdom has been gone. Do we see ourselves on the chest? No, it's gone. We are right at the toes. And it is there that we find something marvelous or profound and very significant, because the stone that is cut out with the hands came and he struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them into pieces. It is that stone. Now I wonder what that meaning of the stone is. So we find this beautiful image of this statue. It has been verified. It has been fulfilled. It took place. It was a dream, materialized, and in that order of events, it was fulfilled. Now, what about the reliability of this, isn't it? How reliable? Oh, you may say, but Gregor, someone might be just cooked up these interpretations. It so happened, it just come into place. It just falls into place. And that's the question that we wrestle with. Sometimes it's so good to be true, but really, It's not just a matter of so good to be true. It is, I believe, an historical record that is reliable, that I can put my bottom dollar on, that because of the fulfilling of this image story, this miracle, this dream that was fulfilled, I can have credibility and reliability, and I can depend on this. So the essentials for knowing the future, let's find out. We want to know the future. That's the question we're exploring. We've got to have historical accuracy. We have a proven track record and dependable predictions that it came to pass. Because whatever we're going to learn from there on, from now on, we'll be able to accept as something that is credible because of the backing and the evidence of the past. Does that make sense? Okay, and I think this is important skill to have in life as well. We cannot just believe everything, can we? Got to have some backing. That is why we do research. And you come here today to explore this research, and you're checking this out, this information that Gary shared previously, and I'm sharing. You've got to check it out. We're not just selling an idea for you to believe everything in wholesale, you know. Like how we just eat pizza, just enjoy it. But you believe there was someone who baked that pizza, just never fall on your lap, you know. So there's evidence. It's amazing. Right in our eating experience, there has to be some research done. We don't do it academically, but we understand there's a cook. We understand someone went and got the ingredients and put it together and never just fall on your lap and just enjoy the thing. But sometimes in life, we carry out life like that without checking it out. And I've discovered, dear friends, as a young person in my life, to know that we can have a certainty, we can have the assurance based on what transpired, and know that there's hope for a better future, better life. Irrespective of what's happening in our world, the crazy things that are happening in our world. And there are many crazy things that are happening in our world, isn't it? Big time. We don't need to mention them. We just think of them, it just exhausts us. It just gets us into a depressed state. We don't want that. But we know that because of this information that is being shared right now, somehow we can find meaning and try to navigate and understand. That's going to be something worth exploring. So we have an historical accuracy here, I believe. There's a proven track record here and dependable predictions that have come to pass. And now we see in our next presentation, what are the warning signals out there? You know, how near is the end? Because that's what the stone represents. That's the question we have to answer in that prophecy, in that dream, in that prediction. While all those events were fulfilled, what represents the stone, an insignificant stone? What's the meaning behind it? And that's what we want to do in a few minutes' time. How near is the end? What are the global warnings? What are the signs that we need to look at so that we can be prepared?
Thank you, Grego. That was amazing. Thank you so much. And we'll take a break right now. Got some archaeological artifacts down the back that we've set up. But I want us to think about what Grego's just showed us. You know, that vision that Daniel was given, he could have said 3 empires, could have said 7, but he said 4 and then divided. And that's how it was. And as Grego shared with us, marriage interrelationships would try to weld Europe together. Various powers came and go, and I think you mentioned right now, the United States of Europe, they called it. And those guys saying, yes, we're going to make it, but it's not there. Unbelievable, these predictions, so exactly fulfilled. And when Grego comes back and shares with us the global warnings, it's mind-blowing to see how close we are indeed to the end. So if you want to have a look at some artifacts, we'll give you about 5 or 10 minutes, and I can explain some of those things for us. And then we're back to you, Grego.
Yep.
Good, thank you so much. Dead Sea Scrolls, like we've got here. And you'll notice how they're stitched together. See the stitching here and here? That's why it was 9 metres long. These were written on vellum, that's like deer hide, goat skins and so on, and that's what they wrote on. Later, well, earlier than this, the Egyptians were using papyrus. I forgot to bring some. I did have a piece of papyrus there, maybe we'll pick that up in a moment. All right, so this was the famous Dead Sea Scrolls and how they were put in. This is the oldest part of the Bible that they've ever actually found. This is a silver scroll. Have you noticed you ever seen the pictures of the Jewish people at the wall in Jerusalem as they rock backwards and forwards like that? They have something around their head and around their arms. Well, inside those little things, a little piece of the Bible. And this is one of those. And this was found in Jerusalem at Ketef Hinnom. And this says, "The Lord bless you, the Lord keep you, and make his face to shine upon you." It's called the priestly blessing. Exactly the same as in your Bible today, but this dates back to the time of Solomon's temple. So this was before the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem. This comes from that period. So very old. That was found in Jerusalem a few years ago. Now, Gregor, I think you mentioned the Cyrus. Okay. This is the famous Cyrus Cylinder. The Bible, as Gregor's just been through it, the Medo-Persians conquered the Babylonians and the Greeks conquered them and so on. This, in the Bible, it says that Isaiah predicted that Cyrus would deliver them from Babylon, the Jews. He mentions that 150 years before this even happens. The guy's not even born yet. He says, yes, this is what's going to happen. 3 times, I think it is, he mentions Cyrus by name. And this is the Cyrus Cylinder. He basically says, this is what I did. I took the Jews out of Jerusalem, took the people out of Jerusalem. They went back to their homelands. I took Babylon. But it was all predicted by Isaiah, and this is the evidence for that prophecy. This is not just make-up stuff. This is the real deal. So that's an amazing. That's in the British Museum today. You have a feel of this one. This is a very old. This is real. This dates back to about 4,000 years ago. It's a pot from what we call early bronze pottery. So if you want to try to get an idea of who's living at that time, that's Abraham's time. Then we have one here. This is called. This is what we call middle bronze. This comes a bit later. This is like the story from the time of Joseph. If you know Joseph and his Technicolor coat, Hollywood made him famous, didn't they? And then another one here. This is what we call late bronze. So we're looking at the time of Jericho and Joshua. And then this little one here, this one here's broken. Most times you find pottery, it's going to be broken because, it's been around a long time, a wall fell on top of it. Mostly you'll find it like this, smashed to pieces. But this is a little pot here, and this one here, this is what we call Iron Age. So this is the time of the kings, if you've heard of, the kings of Israel, like David and Solomon, these guys, that's Iron Age. And then finally we have a little oil lamp. This is Roman oil lamp period time, and you can even see the soot if you look up closer after, because the wick came out of here, olive oil put in here, and this is the sort of lamp that they used in Jesus' time, little oil lamp from the Roman period. This is an interesting one. This is a cylinder seal, and this is the seal of Darius the Great, Darius the First. He's mentioned many times in the Bible, in the books like Ezra and so on. And what they used, this one was, this is a clay thing, they're going to put their seal on it, they just roll this over and leave the seal impression on the wet clay. So that's a cylinder seal. Now here's something interesting here. In the ancient times, let's just say someone bought some property. So Peter here, he's going to go and buy up a property. What's your name, sister? Una. So he's going to buy it from Una. So I, Peter Tokolau, purchased this property from Una. He's going to get some people to sign there, witnesses. Then he's going to roll it up, going to tie some string around it in 2 or 3 places, push some clay over the top of the string, 3 pieces of clay. Then he's going to get his ring, because this was a seal ring, and he's going to press it into the clay. And over time, when this deteriorates, all that's going to be left is the piece of clay. Or if a fire came through it, baked clay. The baked clay with the seal impression on it is what we call a bulle. This is a big one. This is just blown up for you. That's what archaeologists call a bulle, with a seal impression. This is the seal impression of Isaiah the prophet. They found this about 4 or 5 years ago in Jerusalem. Next to, and this is the real size. So that's the real size. That's just so you can see it. It was next to another one, that of a king called Hezekiah. Now, if you know anything about the history, the Hezekiah was ruling at the same time as Isaiah. And this is the seal of Hezekiah the king. This is the seal of Hezekiah's son, who was a really bad guy called Manasseh. This guy Manasseh made blood flow in Jerusalem. This guy practiced human sacrifice. I mean, you say it, he was into it, and he killed the prophet Isaiah, sawed him in half. That guy went to Babylon, and while he was down there, he realised what a fool he'd been and said, God help me, and God said, that's what I've been waiting for. And that guy changed his ways. Amazing. That's one of the most incredible stories you'll read. Now, we saw this little cylinder, the cylinder belonging to Nabonidus. Shows us that Belshazzar was the last king, a co-regent. This one was the Nabonidus Chronicle, so that's the one. Nabonidus is the son, Belshazzar the son. He was a co-regent. Now this one here is very interesting. Have you heard of Sennacherib? All right, Sennacherib was that Assyrian king. The Assyrians ruled before the Babylonians in the Middle East. They were the number one superpower from about 900 BC, from the time of about King David, right on down to 600 BC. They were the number one superpower. But Sennacherib, by the way, the Assyrians were terrorists, you could call them. They would skin a man alive. They would cut off body parts while people were still living. They beheaded people. They threw them around like footballs. You can see it in the British Museum. They were gross. And so when the Assyrians came down to, in the time of Isaiah, to Jerusalem to attack the city of Jerusalem, and Hezekiah was the king, when these people were on the back door, what would you do? You'd do what Hezekiah did. He said, God help me. He prayed, the Bible says, and a message was sent to Isaiah the prophet, and Isaiah said, don't be afraid. They're not even going to shoot an arrow in this city. They're not even going to set a siege ramp up, because we have lots of pictures of the Assyrian siege ramps, because they were masters of belting down walls. We have lots of images of that sort of thing. It's not going to happen. And the Bible says that night 185,000 Assyrian soldiers died just like that. The king went back to Assyria. He was assassinated by one of his sons, and then Esarhaddon took over. All of that archaeologists have found. We know Esarhaddon did take over. The Bible mentioned it. We also know he was assassinated, and we also know that he did go home because he didn't have an army left. Now, what's interesting on this is the Sinachary Prison. We have 3 of these that came out from this time period. One's in the Chicago Oriental Museum in America. Another one's in the Hebrew Museum, the Israeli Museum in Jerusalem. And this one's from the British Museum. Now, what it does, he lists all the cities of Judah that he attacked. The Bible mentions he attacked the cities. When he comes to Jerusalem, this is what he said. I shut up Hezekiah like a bird in a cage, meaning I surrounded him. If he had beaten him, he would have told you. They always boasted about their victories, but he says, that's all I did. That's amazing evidence of the Bible, this particular, we call it the Sennacherib prison. This one to close with, and then I'll talk quickly about the pottery. Oh, by the way, heard of Jezebel? The infamous Jezebel? This is her seal, the Queen Jezebel seal. She's the infamous lady. Not too many ladies call their girls Jezebel, for obvious reasons. George Smith, an Assyriologist, one who reads the cuneiform, was sitting in the British Museum reading these clay tablets, and he picked this one up, began to read, and he said, oh, whoa, that's Noah's flood. This reads almost like the Bible account of Noah's flood. We have lots of them actually, another one called the Atrahasis epic. It's also in the British Museum. They look like Noah's flood. They're very similar. Good evidence for the historical accuracy of the Bible. Finally, these pieces of pottery, these are all real. When you go to the places in Israel, Turkey and so on, you'll see these little mounds. They're civilization mounds, because if an earthquake came through and destroyed the place, they wouldn't bring in the bulldozer, obviously, back then, for obvious reasons. What they would do is they'd use any existing buildings they could, and also some of them that were destroyed, they used the foundations and they build on top of it, bring in dirt and level things off, and then if an earthquake happened, another one, or an army came through. And so as time goes on, the city is growing, the hill is growing over the centuries. So if you go to Jerusalem today and you walk on the streets of Jerusalem, that's not where the Romans were walking or Jesus was. They're 6 metres down, because that's how much that hill has grown in 2,000 years. And archaeologists use pottery to date, because pottery styles change through time. You know, I've been to India, to an archaeological museum, and I've seen pottery. I've said, I've seen that in Israel, because they traded, you see. And you can imagine a lady sees a nice pot and says, where'd you get that from? Wow, I'd like one of those. So they talk to the local potters who might copy it or import it. Someone will import. And so pottery is used to date. So as they're digging down, when you dig in an archaeological, you dig like a big swimming pool, and as you go down, you take every bit of dirt and you sieve it. You have a sieve, and what's left behind is lots of pottery, and that's going to be read every day by the pottery experts who can read the pottery. They know exactly what time that sort of pot. You don't need a whole pot, you just need the rim. See the top here? That's the top of a pot. Or you just need the base. You can see the base there, that's the flat bit. If they see that, they know what type of pot that is, when it comes from, and so they read it. They know, well, where we're digging at this level now, 700 BC, 600 BC, and that's what they use. Now, when you sieve, you're also going to find bones. You're going to find coins sometimes. What if you're digging in Palestine and you came across a lot of pig bones? Who probably didn't live here? The Israelites wouldn't have lived there probably, because they don't eat pigs, right? So every bit you dig starts to put a story together, and many times they realise, wow, this is what happened, da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay? So anyway, that gives you a little bit of an idea. They find, you go to the museums, you know, especially the Louvre Museum, the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, and the British Museum, and Cairo Museum, and stacked full of stuff from Egypt, of course, but just so much rich stuff they've dug out of the earth. All right, Gregor, I reckon we're ready to go back to your presentation. And then after this presentation, another little breather, and the final one, we were looking at Jerusalem and the agenda, the global agenda. Okay? Good. Feel free to pick some of these pots up if you want to. You don't pick those up every day, but just don't drop it. Good carpet here anyway. But those very old ones, so, you know, like we're talking late bronze, we're talking like 1500 BC. Oh yes, I took him out of the museum. I wish.
All right. How near is the end? The global warnings. Now, in the year, let me just get back to my notes. 17 December 1927, a U.S. Marine, while surfacing from a submerged runoff Cape Cod near Provincetown, Massachusetts, was accidentally rammed and sunk by a Coast Guard ship. many heroic efforts were made to rescue 6 known survivors trapped in the forward torpedo room, who had exchanged a series of signals with divers by tapping on the hull. As the trapped men used the last of available oxygen in the submarine, a diver placed his helmeted ear to the side of the vessel and received this Morse code message. And the Morse code message read, "Is there any hope? Is there any hope?" That's a good question, isn't it, when you're trapped inside a submarine? Is there any hope? And when we look at our world today and we see the stuff that's happening, I'm sure you have asked yourself this question. Is there any hope in this world? Now, I believe there is. I really believe. It seems many people all over the world today are being trapped with the same message that this diver had inside this hull of this whole world. Is there any hope? Now, this guy by the name of Winston Churchill, he was the Prime Minister at one stage of Great Britain. He would tell you, "I tell you, I have no hope. I see no hope for the world." Very interesting character, Sir Winston Churchill, who really made a difference for Great Britain and for the world as well. Is there any hope? In Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, as the story is told, we go back to this place and we see some familiar stories come to life. There's a story of a person by the name of Jesus, who is familiar of telling stories right up on the Mount of Olives, and you'll notice that famous picture. What do you see there? Who can tell me? Not the 3 guys there on the left. I'm talking about the center one. What do you notice? The dome, all right? And that's very significant. There's a lot of things that can be said on that. In one of the Bible books, Matthew 24, verse 3, it says, "Tell us what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world." This is a question that was posed to Jesus about the signs of his coming. Because I want us to understand that in the last presentation that we listened to, we're still going to find out about the stone and what that means. And in looking into the signs, that is going to lead us to find out what that stone means. And let me burst that bubble of yours. You might be eagerly wanting to know what that means. I believe that is the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, we can cut short this presentation by just making one statement. And it will be that if this stone that represents the second coming of Jesus Christ, by implication, there must be a first coming of Jesus Christ. Do you follow the logic? Right? That's very simple. I can see a lot of people nodding. And that first coming of Christ is a story that we are all familiar with. It is that story of Jesus being born in the manger. It's the Christmas story. It's that first coming where Jesus was born in a manger that many of the people in our world celebrate the Christmas story. It's going to happen in a few months' time. 25th December is coming and Christmas is going to be celebrated. That is that narrative, baby Jesus being born. But that same good old book says that he is going to come the second time. But what will be the signs that will bring that event closer is the question that was posed by the disciples of Jesus to Jesus. Tell us, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the world? Because that was that prophecy that was written many, many years prior to Jesus coming on the scene, prior to the fact of the disciples even asking the question. And so the world news, we have the signs of the end. On the edge of the end, we sit and we contemplate what could be the possible outcomes. The first sign we see in the natural world, the devastation that is wreaked by many natural disasters, earthquakes. Have you heard of them recently? Yeah. And there will be earthquakes in various places. In the book of Matthew chapter 24, it is a chapter where Jesus talks about the signs that are going to take place. The words of Jesus. This is, if you ask Jesus, what are the signs? Jesus is going to tell us. There will be various earthquakes in various places. In other words, in certain areas of our world, this phenomena is going to take place. And you will notice earthquakes are increasing as we speak. First 10 years in the 20th century, there were recorded 18 quakes. In the last of over 6 years, 42 recorded quakes. In the first of the 21st century now, 217. The numbers are increasing. That's the point. This is a sad picture, isn't it? Famines. We should be grateful that we have food to eat, isn't it? But just bear in mind there are other places that don't have. Actually, the COVID pandemic has brought the statistics to an even glaring position. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I know the media doesn't report on this much because of the other driving agendas of news and what the media likes to broadcast. But let me tell you, dear friends, this picture is a reality in our 21st century. You would think that in our postmodern world, with all the technology we would solve, or we would have solved the problem of world hunger and poverty. In the aftermath of the Ukrainian Russian War, we're going to see, and the prognosticators are saying, a different unfolding of events. It's coming to a point where world hunger and poverty, and that picture is going to be the front poster picture of any news magazine that can speak to our conscience. So that's what's happening. There will be famines. Jesus' words, these are the signs. There will be famines. 25,000 people die daily from hunger, including 10,000 children. There will be the signs of famine. Can you believe it? 854 plus million are undernourished. They're having a meal, but it's not a nutritious meal. You know? And that's the important thing. So yeah, if I can just say, be careful what you eat, okay? It's important to understand that component in our health as well, in our lives. It's a very important thing. Tsunamis and cyclones and floods. The recent one in Florida, just the other day. At one stage I tried to keep track, Gary, of all the natural disasters that are happening in our world. I could at one stage spit it out. This is what happened last week, this is what happened 2 days ago. I'm losing track because it's inundated now. It's like, and you know what's happening? I'm slowly becoming desensitized. And that's a dangerous thing. Because we get so used to media, what's happening, we are not conscious of someone not having food, and it doesn't trouble us anymore. I think part of why we do what we do, what I do, what we do, and what Gary does is not only to just share information and bring you to a point of decision, but it is to conscientize us. If anything, understand that we are not living in a bubble. Part of our presentation is to burst the bubble and get us to live in the reality of where we are, to demonstrate that this world is ending and moving to a direction. And all this is just reminders, hey, hang on, something is happening. Let's go on. Luke chapter 21 verse 25 says, and there will be distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves are roaring. There's great anxiety in our community. Not necessarily individually, but collectively as a society, as a municipality, as government. There's anxiety out there. Politicians are wrestling to find solutions to the problems. You know, my wife is a medical doctor, and she shares with me the statistics. At least in a day of about 12 to 15 patients that she sees, at least 4 of them suffer with some kind of mental instability. Not necessarily the ones that have a chronic mental disability, but just people that are anxious, this anxiety. They cannot handle life because of the many uncertainties out there that affects the mental state. And all she can do as a medical doctor is, besides prescribing medication, is to offer some kind of hope as a practitioner. But the Bible says, Jesus says, there will be distress of nations with perplexity, worry. You know, worry is the number one killer. Yeah. What's happening? Nations are anxious about such terrifying events. What about pestilences, super germs? That picture has been a very familiar picture over the past 2-3 years, isn't it? That coronavirus. We have an Indian delicacy that we like to make. It's called it's a savory dish, and it's fried in shallow olive oil, and it's mixed with chickpeas and some shallots and onions. It's a very nice, nutritious one. And one famous Indian chef tried to make these, what we call a savory bowl, which is a vade or I can't translate the Indian name to English. And tried to make it up in that way. It's very funny, very funny. And he had this big picture and says, here's a COVID savory for you, enjoy, for your good health. So whenever I see this picture, it reminds me of that dish. I should make some next time I come and tell the wife to make a few. And we can enjoy some. We might brand it. So we're familiar with that. There will be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places, and that's already taking place. 500 million infected with the Spanish flu, 17 to 50 million deaths. That's in our past history. It transpired. Ebola, SARS, swine flu, bird flu, foot and mouth disease, and the list goes on and on. COVID statistic. 608 million people were infected with the COVID. How many deaths? 6.5 million deaths. Is this the prediction? Now we see the signs in our political world. Natural world, there are signs. What about the political world? Did Jesus say anything about this? Did the Bible say anything about this? I'm sure it did. Matthew chapter 24 verse 6. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Do we need to say anything more about this? Have you heard about the Ukrainian Russian War? This didn't happen 100 years ago. Hey, just the other day. And you will hear of wars. Maybe now there's no rumors of wars. It's already happening. No one is saying, hey, we're going to start a war. Let's make it happen. That's out. We are establishing the war has already been declared, and they're fighting even as we speak. There's different types of wars, civil wars. There's big wars, small wars, territorial wars, wars between our neighbors too. We mustn't forget those wars, social wars. It's all included in this business of the signs and moving towards the end. Remember the 30, 40-year wars every year and counting. $268 million on war every hour. I cannot fathom that statement. That's big money. It's really big money. If someone could be smart enough, say, let's not do this, and this money can solve the problem of world hunger and poverty. But it shows the evil inclinations of humanity, of mankind, isn't it? What's in the heart of human beings? And what steps will they go to take to obliterate, all for the sake of power? 80 times more spent on war than is needed to provide water and sanitation to the world. 13,355 nuclear bombs in stock. Stockpiling bombs. And imagine, the most cunning thing is to plan on bringing death upon others by stockpiling ammunition. That's a scary thought, isn't it? It is very scary. International global conflicts. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. Matthew 24, verse 7. It's happening, dear friends. Nations were angry. Notice the last book of the Bible calls for this reminder that the nations are getting angry because they want control. And what has that produced? The millions of death of innocent lives. The casualties are the innocent people. The women and the children suffer. What about the threat of nuclear conflict? Nuclear conflict is a threat. Everyone is scared about an individual in Russia that has access to a nuclear button. Not only him, all the other superpowers of the earth or of the nations have this easy accessibility of declaring nuclear battle. Now, the signs in the social world. We discovered the signs in the natural world, the signs in the political world. What about the signs in the social world? And what would Jesus say? So in Matthew 24, verse 12, and because of what? Lawlessness will abound. The love of many will grow cold. You know, dear friends, as I'm getting mature and older, I appreciate law. Because in order for me to be free, I need to have a law to protect me to be free. See, dear friends, freedom is not autonomy. And that's the difference. Many people want to have autonomy, meaning no rules, and that is why they can practice whatever they want. But hang on, that will only leave a lot of problems. But true freedom is governed by having good laws to live by so that we can enjoy doing life and living in peace. But the Bible says, because of no respect for the law, the love of many will grow cold. But know this, that in the last days, what times? Perilous times, dangerous times will come, for men will be what? Lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Having a form of godliness, but denying its power. That's what the Bible says. The last days, when we come to the end of time, close to the end of time, this is the characteristics. This is the demonstration. This is how you would know we are heading towards, because of what was described. People will be selfish. Violence will increase. I was surprised when you look at America, the gun violence. Just the other day was it in Thailand? You heard about that incident? A man goes rampant and kills toddlers in a preschool. 22 people. It's just increasing. It's a sad state of affairs, violence. You know, in the 1940s, what the top school problems were? This is really interesting. Check this out, talking in class. Chewing gum, those were top school problems in the 1940s. How many of you were around in the 1940s? Okay, making noise, top problem in school. Running in the hallway, cutting in line, no uniform, littering. Now, let's look at the 2000s, just the recent. What are the top school problems? Let's see. Drug use, alcohol abuse, pregnancy, suicide, rape, robbery, assault, shootings. Today in Australia, we have a lot of child abuse as well. There's a call not only for child abuse, for women abuse. You know, end it now. You've seen the slogan, that program? End it now. Stop the violence. 1 in 6 boys here in Australia and 1 in 4 girls sexually abused before the age of 18. Before they reach 18. That's the statistics. Sad reality, isn't it? Now, what are the signs in the religious world? You know, Jesus talks about this. Signs in the natural world, signs in the political world, in the social world, and now in the religious world. Could there be a sign in the religious world? You'll be surprised to talk about a sign. What does that mean? A sign in a religious world that the end is near? Well, let's look at it. We have seen religious cults that come on the scene. For false Christs and false prophets will arise. Matthew 20:24. Are there false Christs, false prophets? There was a documentary that I was watching. A person in Australia, an individual, believes that he is Christ here on earth. Lives somewhere around near Byron Bay. Interesting. False prophets. Jim Jones cult. Remember that? The David Koresh wacko cult. Menachem Skinnerson. Whoever that is. All cultic exercises and practices. 7 current claimants to be Christ. Yeah, that's the guy. Yeah. Retired Siberian traffic cop, Syrian. They claim to be Jesus. The cross-dressing former British spy, David Shayla. Zambian taxi driver, Jesus of Kitwe. I remember this guy. Former waiter, Inro Cristo of Brazil. These are all the informers, so to speak. Former politician, Jesus Matayoshi of Japan. Moses Longwe of South Africa, yes. And here we find Alan John Miller and Mary Luck claim to be the reincarnations of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. These are Aussie guys. That's a Byron Bay one, yeah. How would you distinguish them? That's the question, isn't it? What about secularism? When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Will he find people that are seeking for truth, finding the answers, finding the truth, and not just following blindly the crowd, the masses? Follow the mass. You've got to be careful, because you just got to drop the M. You'll see what you're following. Be careful of the crowd. Understand where you are in today's world. When the Son of Man, in other words, when Jesus comes, that's what we're looking for. That's the stone that we are waiting for, the last leg of this prophetic Lego piece. Our eyes are focused on that. Will he find you and I looking for that truth that is only found, I believe, in him? Now, notice there's a widespread disbelief in God and the Bible. Now, there's a movement that's going on in our world today, especially in academic community, where the atheistic movement is so rife. Atheism believes that there's no God. They are creating themselves into evangelists. They're going into universities, and one of the aims of this movement, the new atheism it's called, is to convert people from the belief in God to a no belief in God. Amazing job, isn't it? Just think about it. You don't believe in God. You don't feel he exists, but you spend the whole career proving that he doesn't exist, as if he exists. It's the logic that is gone backward, forward, isn't it? So we find a widespread disbelief in God and the Bible. People don't want to believe. And I can understand why they may have reasons for not believing. Maybe the Christians didn't practice religion well. They are people. But I say to people, don't judge everyone like that. Look at what Jesus stood for, not what the politics of religion is all about. What the Bible teaches. Discover that truth for yourself and find out the answer for yourself. 2,000-year-old prediction. Disbelieve in creation by God. There is that. In 2 Peter, the Bible says, knowing this first, that in the last days they will willfully forget that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of water and in the water. We tend to forget that now, that God created. And there's this familiar teaching and philosophy that we were once right there, and now we become so sophisticated. We become so sophisticated that we can produce the greatest amount of ammunition to obliterate everyone. Dear friends, that philosophy gave rise to the philosophy or the mantra of survival of the fittest. And when you have that and espouse that theory of survival of the fittest, then you have the right to survive at the expense of killing others so that you can survive. That theology, that philosophy sits well if God doesn't exist. Because if God doesn't exist, where do you get your meaning from? Where do you get your value from? What gives you purpose? How do you know between good and evil? By what set of criteria? That's a big question, isn't it? But that's the philosophy that's driving many agendas today, especially amongst young people, and we need to address this. We wish we had more time to unpack that. Global warnings are in the natural world, in the political world, in the social world, and in the religious world. What do they all mean? What does all this mean? We see the signs, yes? Where is it heading? All right, let's see quickly. And when you see all these things, Know that what? It is near. What is near? That stone. That's what it's all about. Don't forget that imagery and that last stone. It's coming. And we believe that is the second coming of Jesus Christ. What is near? Tell us, what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the world? Remember this dream? This is revision now. Remember that? Okay, now we are here. That stone represents Jesus. I believe, and in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Isn't that a beautiful picture, dear friends? Because we see this as a picture not only to prove the biblical story or Daniel chapter 2, but it is to usher in world peace forever and ever, because there's only one kingdom that can establish it, and it is the kingdom of God. The days of these kings divided Rome, the stone, Christ's return, and the end of the world. That will be the great event and the last empire. You see, dear friends, this person by the name of John, one day he also had a dream. He had a vision. Dreams are powerful, isn't it? That's why Martin Luther, Dr. King, the activist, his famous speech was what? I have a dream. And his dream was fulfilled. And check this out. If that person who had a dream and it was fulfilled, what about God's dream for you and for the world? Is it possible to make that dream come true? And I think it is possible. So this person by the name of John the Patmos, John the Revelator, incarcerated, bound up in the island all by himself, he receives a vision. And he says that the kingdoms of this world would have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign how long? Just for a few years? He will reign forever and ever. Let's look into just quickly now into the last empire. What would this look like? And I get excited when I read these words. God will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, no more sorrow, no more crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things are passed away. Then he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I will make all things new. You see, dear friends, this last empire, this new kingdom that we are looking for, this second coming of Jesus Christ, is the time when that kingdom that he establishes promises that there will be no reason to cry. There will be no pain. Can you imagine a world where there's no pain, no death, no diseases, no COVID, no restrictions? We can travel freely. That's the kingdom we're looking for, dear friends. That is where our eyes are focused on. No tears, no grieving, no sorrow, fighting, no pain, no death, no anything. The great God has shown the king. Daniel continues, explaining to Nebuchadnezzar, this God has shown you, O king, what shall come to pass in the what? Daniel looks down to the time that you are here today. He's speaking many years ago, thousands of years ago, to 2022, 9th of October, year at Enmo. This is for us, isn't it? It's for you. And when I look at this prediction, I always see myself in the story. And I encourage you to see yourself in the story, in this great narrative. Shall come to pass in the future, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation is sure. Dear friends, you can count on this. You can count on this because God says He will come. So what should be our reaction? Finally. And when these things begin to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, dear friends, because your deliverance is approaching. Don't give up. Don't be too concerned. Don't say, I'm going to throw in the towel. It's the end. Hope is a significant feature of life. Many people are placing their hope in a lot of things that's not delivering. They put their hope in the drugs. That's why they do drugs. They put their hope in sex. They put hope in politicians. They put hope in things that don't deliver. But we have hope. I hope we've discovered that the coming kingdom and the coming king invites you and me to be ready for that great and wonderful dispensation of time. The deliverance is approaching. Thank God for that. And the last empire begins. Can you imagine? No sorrow, grieving, pain, death. We're about all these things to be fulfilled in the last empire. So, is there any hope, is the question. And the answer is yes, there is hope. I think I'm done now. Dear friends, brings us to the end of this presentation. About, I don't know what you make out of this, but my challenge and my appeal to you is to consider this as one of the greatest appeal from the God who reveals things, and it does comes to pass. We can count on it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Grego. Amazing prediction, isn't it? You know, as Grego said there, no tears, no pain, no sorrow. Haven't we stood over too many open graves and said goodbye to too many loved ones? I know the last time I spoke to my mum was over the telephone. I was in the States and she was dying of cancer, and I had just been to see her, and now a month later she was dying. No pain. Some of you know what pain's like. I have a friend that actually had, he was an SAS trooper, Western Australia, years ago, 60 years ago, landed wrongly with his parachute, had to have a morphine drip going into his body ever since because of the pain. No pain. What a day that will be. No suffering. No sorrow. I was in a hotel here in Sydney one night. I was living at Canberra at the time, I think it was, and had to come up here to Sydney. Walls were fairly thin. Could hear the lady next door, 1 o'clock in the morning, sobbing her heart out. It's on the phone to her husband who's gone off with another lady. I tell you what, there's lots of brokenness in our world. Thank you, Grego. What a day when these things will be no more. A new world. That's what we need. That's what the world desperately needs. So thanks so much for sharing that. Amazing. I'm not a prophet, nor am I the son of a prophet, but I'm going to make a prediction right now. Are you listening to my prediction? When you go home tonight, before you get into bed, you're going to take your shoes off your feet. That's my prediction. We usually do, don't we? But seriously, I hope when you go home tonight and you look at your feet, you're going to remember what Grego shared. We're down in the feet of iron and clay. There's not too much left after the soles of your feet, is there? It's weak, it's divided, it's soon to pass away. What's next? That rock. That represents the hope that our world desperately needs. Glad for that. Right, we'll just change over this presentation. If you want to stand up, stretch your arms, stretch your legs, and then in about 5 minutes we'll finish off with our last presentation, Jerusalem and the Global Agenda. for us. It's better than going to sleep. Okay, you may sit down, and we'll get started into our last presentation. By the way, I wonder, Peter, if you could pass those little pieces of paper out. I think we have some there. I'm just going to talk about the countdown series that's coming. Next Saturday evening, we continue this series. It's a new series called Countdown. We go every Friday night, Saturday night, Saturday, Monday night, all right? 7 o'clock, we don't go for 5 hours like this today. We just have 2 presentations. The first one this coming Saturday night is called The Curse of the Forbidden Prophecy. I'll be here and I'll be sharing in a presentation from the book of Daniel. You can almost set your watch by it. It's an amazing prediction. Then Cosmic Conspiracy. We go to the heart of the book of Revelation. Why is there so much suffering? And then on Sunday night, Tutankhamun's Treasures. Looking at the journey to eternity. The Egyptians were obsessed with eternity. You probably noticed that. And then the final showdown, how to protect your most important relationships. We go to the book of Revelation. So what we're going to be doing in this series is zeroing in on the 10% and putting like a microscope on it. And so Grego will be here, I'll be here this coming week, and then we'll continue the series. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy that. Invite a friend to come along with you. They will be so glad you invited them. All right, let's move into our last presentation. Jerusalem and the global agenda. I want to go back 2,000 years ago to the city of Jerusalem. Grego took us there, and Jesus gave predictive signs of the end of the world, you remember. But I want to go back to some other things he talked about. Here is Herod's temple. Herod the Great was an incredible builder of magnificent monuments and structures in the land of Palestine back in his time. He was the one that built Caesarea. That's his palace on the right, what's left of it. He built an aqueduct. You can see this on the left here, carrying water to Caesarea. Caesarea is on the Mediterranean Sea, and it's where the Romans ruled Palestine from when they were here. That was their headquarters. And in the Countdown series, we'll bring you back to here. Amazing discovery made here that we'll talk about one night. Masada, he built a number of fortresses. The fortress of Masada overlooks the Dead Sea on the far right, on the right-hand side picture. You can see a bit of water right at the back. This is the Dead Sea. And up at Masada, Herod had 2 palaces up here. Huge water cisterns, because it didn't rain much, and when it did rain, they were able to collect water in these great big cisterns, which you could fit a bus in, pretty much. Also the Herodian Fortress near Bethlehem. Herod the Great built this one. He also built Macarius. This is across the Dead Sea in Jordan. Macarius is the place where John the Baptist was beheaded. You've probably heard of John the Baptist. He was beheaded here by Herod, another one of the Herods, one of his descendants. Herod the Great is the one that tried to kill the baby Jesus in the Christmas story. In fact, Caesar Augustus was his friend, and Caesar once said, it's better to be Herod's pig than Herod's sons. Why did he say that? Because Herod obviously didn't think the pig was good to eat or something, but he killed his kids and he killed his wife. Safer to be his pig, they said. You know, he was a barbaric sort of a person. He was always afraid someone would take his throne, and hence he wanted to kill the baby in the Christmas story. But it was Herod who built this temple to which Jesus came. This is the structure that was here when Jesus of Nazareth came here. His disciples, his followers, took him on a little tiki tour of the temple one day, showing him all the gold and the silver and everything in it. And notice what Jesus said to them. Do you not see all these things, this magnificent structure? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. This whole thing is going to come down one day, Jesus said. Well, the disciples could hardly believe that, and because this was a magnificent building. The Romans had actually put money into this thing too. So they come back up here to the Mount of Olives, where we're sitting taking this picture. And as they look back over the city of Jerusalem, they ask Jesus a double question. Tell us, they said, when shall these things be? When is it going to be that the stones of Jerusalem at the temple will no longer be there? And as Grego answered the second part, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the world? That was the second part. I want to look at the first for a very good reason, and then we'll come to the global agenda. Jesus then proceeded to give a number of predictions regarding Jerusalem, the temple, and the Jewish nation. Notice what he said. Number one, Jerusalem would be surrounded by an embankment, that's a wall, and it would be destroyed. Here's his prediction. This is a few days earlier when he came in, we call it Palm Sunday, on the donkey, but it was at the Mount of Olives again when he said these words. Now as he drew near, that's near to the city of Jerusalem, he saw the city and he wept over it. He sobbed his heart out because he could see what was going to come. He knew the future, saying, days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment, a wall around you, surround you and close you in on every side and level you and your children within you to the ground. He could see it coming. Number two prediction, the temple would be totally destroyed. We actually saw it a moment ago, not one stone left upon another. Now, some of the stones in the temple platform are incredible. By the way, whenever you see that sort of a stone with that edging around it, that's typical Herodian stone. Archaeologists know we're dealing with something that Herod built, because that was his signature in building, if you like. Some of the stones are 20 metres long by 2 metres wide by 3 metres high. I've seen a stone behind the wall where you've seen the Jewish people rock backwards and forwards reading their Bible or praying at the wall. Behind that, you can get behind there. I've seen a stone that's longer than from here to the back of that room, easy. Massive stones. Now, I'm not suggesting that the temple had stones in it like that, but clearly there were some big stones in the temple. This is just the platform. The temple was built on top. There. Number three, the Jews would fall by the sword. Jesus said, there will be great distress in the land and wrath against this people. They will fall by the sword. Now, the fourth prediction was the Jews would be scattered among the nations of the world. Jesus said, they will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Number five prediction, the Gentiles, that is non-Jewish people, they would inhabit the city of Jerusalem. Now, question. Here is the prediction, first of all. Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles. In other words, they'll be treading down on its streets until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. That phrase, the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled, means it's a biblical term for the end days. So, were they fulfilled, these very five specific predictions? What happened? Well, let's go back to Jerusalem, like about 2,000 years ago. It's 66 AD, 35 years after Jesus made those predictions. By the way, we know he made these predictions before Jerusalem was destroyed because we have the Gospels and we know when they were written. So 35 years later, Gessius Florus, he's the commander of Jerusalem. The Roman leader, he decides to take a temple tax from the Jewish people. They said nothing doing, and they revolted against Gessius Florus, massacred the Roman garrison, and for the first time for many years, the Jews were in control of Jerusalem. Well, the Romans weren't going to take that sitting down, so they sent Cestius Gallus, another commander, to Jerusalem with an army of about 30,000 soldiers. Cestius Gallus surrounded the city of Jerusalem. He started moving in, taking the city gradually, piece by piece, when suddenly he withdrew. Historians to this day don't know why did he take off, but he left the city, went down the road with his troops. The Jewish soldiers inside the city chased them and had a big fight down the road. And at that point in time, the Christians who were inside Jerusalem remembered some words that Jesus had told them, a warning prediction. He said, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that its destruction is near, then let those in Jerusalem flee. Now, how are you going to flee a city when it's surrounded by an army? When the Christians saw the Romans take off and the Jews chased after them and went out of the city and the gates were, they knew this is the time. So at that very time, while the fighting's going down the road, the Christians took off. They came over here to Pella. This is in Jordan. And this is the work of the Sydney University here. They dig there every year at Pella in Jordan. And they escaped here, and escaped the terrible tragedy was about to break on the people in Jerusalem. So the Romans next, now that Cestius Gallus was defeated by the Jewish soldiers, the Romans sent Vespasian, another commander. Now this guy, he started at the north and he worked his way down, attacking cities, villages and so on, but letting the people escape in one direction, Jerusalem. So attack this city, attack that city, let the people escape, let them go to Jerusalem. Soon he's got everybody holed up in Jerusalem and he can deal with them properly in one place. So just before Vespasian goes to Jerusalem, the Emperor Nero died, that infamous butcher of a man. He dies and Vespasian races back to Rome to become the emperor, to take control. He puts his son in charge of to destroy or to put down this revolt, and that's Titus. Titus besieged Jerusalem. After 4 years of fighting, they surround Jerusalem again, 70 AD. Titus starves the Jewish people. How does he do it? He builds a 5-mile earthen rampart or wall around Jerusalem to stop people getting in with food and weapons and to stop people getting out. What did Jesus predict 35 years before, 36 years before, 9 years before actually now? They're going to do this. And that's what happened. Josephus actually was a Jewish historian. First of all, he fought the Romans. Then he changed sides and joined the Romans, and he records all the things that happened in this war. Josephus tells us that 1 million Jews perished in this siege. He tells how there were piles of corpses. The Romans clambered over the top of them to continue the fighting elsewhere in Jerusalem. It was a terrible, terrible carnage scene. And the Jews have suffered terribly down through the centuries. You visit Poland and you hear about the tragic stories of where persecutions have been put on these people, burning down whole synagogues with people inside the buildings. Of course, last war, Second World War, 1 million people died here in Auschwitz alone. 6 million Jews went to death factories put up by the Nazis. Taken people here, it's a sobering place to visit, and of course you always see Jewish people here because they come to remember what happened to many of their people. Well, the Romans built a fortress overlooking the city, the Temple of Jerusalem. You can see it there with the circle in red there. That was put there much earlier because they knew the temple is the centre of Jewish nationalism. It's their centre of pride. This is the most important building to the Jewish people. So they knew if ever there was going to be a fight, it would end up here or start here. So they had a fortress overlooking it. The Jews were in control of that, but the Romans drove them out. And the last place the Jewish soldiers were going to go to was the temple. They're holed up in the temple. Titus said to his soldiers, don't destroy the temple. It's one of the most amazing buildings in the world at this time. Don't destroy it. But during the fighting, someone threw a firebrand into the temple and the whole thing went up in smoke, and the gold and the silver evidently melted down between the cracks in the rocks. And when the fighting was over and the fire had gone out, the Romans tore the stones one off another to get at the gold and the silver and completely demolished the temple. And today, where the Jewish people took their last stand and the fires are gone, this is what the archaeologists have found. You will notice where the sky is, that's the top, that's the level of the road I mentioned. That's today. That's how much that city has grown in 2,000 years. The archaeologists have taken all the dirt away and showed the pavement where Jesus would have walked. The stones have smashed it to pieces in the front here. See the big rocks at the back? Those were part of the temple up on top. The Romans tore it apart and threw down the stones, and that's the rubble from the temple. Over here on the left, there's the shops where they would have sold animals and changed money, because there used to be a bridge that came from there up to the top. We have a part of the bridge still left up there. So amazingly fulfilled. I mean, this book is absolutely uncanny in its predictions. Jesus predicted this is what would happen, and we even have the evidence there today. And not one stone left upon another. It's a flat as a pancake, this Temple Mount. The only buildings are these ones put by the Muslims there back 800 years after Jesus had been here. They were put up much later. If ever you go to Rome, make sure you go to the Forum of Rome, and you will see the Victory Arch of Titus. You look up underneath and you will see the Romans carrying away the 7-branched candlestick. Very famous to the Jewish people. This was a piece of furniture in the temple, and they're carrying it away because Jesus had predicted they will destroy the temple. Daniel had predicted, we read earlier in an earlier presentation, predicted 500 years before the event. Jesus had predicted it, and it's exactly what the archaeologists have discovered. And of course, there's no Jewish temple in Jerusalem today. The mosque, that golden dome building, there's another mosque on the end. You can just see a dome, a grey dome on the far left. An Australian tried to burn that down, by the way. That's the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That was where the temple once stood, where those buildings are. And of course, the Jews revolted again. Palestine was the most difficult part of the Roman Empire because the Jews wanted their independence. And after they revolted in 66 AD, in 135 they did it again in what is known as the Bar Kokhba revolt. And this time the Roman emperor, who was Hadrian, he said, "I've had it up to here. I've finished with these Jewish people." He said, "We drove them out of Palestine." And they no longer lived, most of them, in Palestine anymore. They were scattered around the world. And today, most of the Jewish people live in the great cities of New York, of Moscow, of London, here in Sydney and other places, than do in Israel itself. I was sharing this countdown series, those sort of meetings in New York on one occasion in Brooklyn. There are some 2 million Jews who live in New York alone, in that one city. They are scattered around the world. It's amazing how accurate Jesus was. And of course, the Gentiles, the non-Jewish people, are the main ones who inhabit the old city of Jerusalem. If you ever visit it, you'll find there's a quarter for the Armenians. They're not Jewish. There's a quarter for the Christians. They're not Jewish. There's a quarter for the Muslims, the Arabs. They're not Jewish. And there's a section for the Jews. 3/4 of Jerusalem is trodden down by the Gentiles. As Jesus said, it would be inhabited by non-Jewish people. And the Palestinian Arabs control the most sacred site of the Jews today. That's the Temple Mount. They are the ones, the Arabs, control that piece of real estate. That's why the Jews come to the wall. That's as close as they can get. That's why they pray there, because up top is where their temple once stood. You know, when you look at that, it's unbelievable, almost. Specific predictions precisely fulfilled. Now, why do we show these this afternoon? Because the same Jesus who gave these predictions and the predictions about the signs that Gregor shared is the same Jesus who gave the amazing prophecies of the book of Revelation to John on Patmos. You see, it was on Patmos here that John was given great visions dealing with our very time, as we're going to see for a moment here and as we see in the Countdown series. John was put in a cauldron of boiling oil. The Romans wanted to kill him, but he wouldn't cook. So then they exiled him to Rome, to Patmos, I should say. Rome had a penal colony here on the island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea. And many people from around the world come to this famous cave here called the Cave of the Apocalypse, the Revelation. And they come from all over the world, and you can see them in this cave. This is the traditional place where they say John had the revelation. Well, we don't know where he really had it. Somewhere on this lonely island of Patmos, John was shown stuff to do with our age, as we're going to see a little bit now, and certainly in the rest of the Countdown series. John sees in the centre of the book of Revelation Earth's final conflict. the final showdown on planet Earth. I want you to notice what he saw. He saw three beasts, a dragon, a sea beast and a land beast, and together these three powers form what we could call a global world order. Notice how he described it here. Revelation chapter 13. Then I saw a beast rising up out of the sea. The dragon, now in this prophecy, the dragon is like the one who controls the strings. He's like the one who's calling the shots, and the other two players do his bidding. They work together. Then I saw a beast rising up out of the sea. The dragon gave him his power, his throne and great authority. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. And it says, he exercises all the authority of the first beast, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. So the whole world one day is going to follow these three powers, according to John. So how do they control the whole world? Two methods, John says. Number one, economic and financial control. Notice what he says. He, that's the land beast, causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell. What's that? That's economic control. You can't buy, you can't sell unless, here comes a mandate, except the one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Unless people take the mark of the beast, they will not be able to buy or sell. That's the first one, economic coercion. Then comes physical coercion, is another way they are going to control. John says he was granted power to cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be what? To be killed. Physical coercion. Now, what's the purpose of this global control? Why do they want to control the world, you and me? Here's the answer. May surprise you, may sound a bit out of this world, but this is what John says. It's for global worship or allegiance. Notice what John says. All the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon, who gave authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast. He, that's the land beast now, he causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. Worship, worship, worship. That's a religious word. That's a word from the spiritual sphere of life, as we say. That's what John says. Finally, what will be the result of global control? What will be the end game? What will be the result of all this stuff? Another surprising thing, one of the great factors will be sadly this: global economic meltdown. Notice the way John puts it. The merchants of the earth will weep and they'll mourn. They're the financiers, the business people. Why? For no one buys their merchandise anymore. For in 1 hour, in other words, a very short time, such great riches come to nothing. A global meltdown. Now, is this really coming? Or did John just eat a good sort of type of mushrooms one night? Maybe John had too much to eat and had a bad dream. Let me show you something amazing, and we can only touch it for the surface. In Countdown, we'll go into much more detail, and it's mind-boggling. You can almost see, once you get into the biblical prophets, you can see what's going on today. You can understand where we are and what's coming and how to avoid what's coming. Now let's talk about globalism for a moment. By the word globalism, we mean the world is a global village. Economically, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, culturally, technologically, sociologically, medically, spiritually. You don't think the world is technologically a global village today? I was out in the middle of the back blocks of Papua New Guinea, Bougainville. We've been driving for 2 or 3 hours, all on the back of a truck. You can do it out there. And we stopped for a rest. Everybody jumps off the truck, jumps onto their mobile phones, to connect with people. Doesn't matter where you are in the world today, it's the way it is, isn't it? But let's talk about globalisation. The Lexus and the olive tree. I have a fascinating book in my library at home, this book, the Lexus. The Lexus being a nice car that usually more people with a bit more money can afford. The olive tree, that's the way people get their income back in times past in the Middle East, the olive tree. So the rich and the poor, basically, he's saying. Thomas Friedman, he was a New York Times columnist. I think he still may be writing for them. But he's looking at this term globalisation. What he says, this means the world is today a global economic village. And he's writing back in the 1990s, and he's looking at what's starting to transpire, and he's saying, what is driving us to become a global economic village? 3 factors, he said, are driving us. Number 1, the democratization of technology, meaning all people almost all over the world, no matter where you live, can get hold of this technology. And it's true, isn't it? You can be grandma, 90, 100 years of age, and you can go to the second-hand shop down here in Enmore and buy yourself an old computer, and you can set up business here in Enmore and sell icicle poles to the people living in Alaska if you want to, right? That's our world. We can do that today. We are a global village because of the technology. We can, especially with smartphones and so on, we can connect with the rest of the world. The democratization of finances, meaning you can easily get money today to buy this stuff. You say, I can't get money. Yes, you can. Just go to a shop and ask for a credit card. It's a little loan. Just be careful how you use them. You might end up in debt. But people have much easier access to buy this stuff today. That's what he means. Number 3, this is the democratization of information. Information flows so readily around the world today, thanks to satellites and all of that sort of thing. If you don't believe me, you can go home in a moment and you can watch live your favourite Outer Mongolian soccer team live on TV if you want to, almost, right? That's the world today, thanks to information flowing so readily. Now, the point is, he says, there are serious implications for this. One is the possibility that now that we're so interconnected economically, there's an opportunity for global economic control. It's really possible today. Think about our world today, cashless society. You could never control people economically unless you have a cashless society, because you can have money under your mattress, buried under the house, and people will be willing to barter you a bit of food for a bit of your cash. But once you've got cashless society, now you can be controlled. And we're moving that way. ABC television. COVID-19 is speeding up Australia's shift towards a cashless future. Why? Because let's not touch money, because someone might catch the virus by touching the money. So let's use our credit cards, remember. Channel 9 News, cashless society looms. Australians tipped to move away from cash by 2025. That was back in March this year. In fact, just the other night, I think it was in where was it? Ashfield on Friday evening. Some of the people said, yeah, you're right. You said, we can't even go to a restaurant in some of our parts of town because they'll only take a credit card. You can't even use cash. It's where our world is moving. And once you have that set up, they can shut you down. And they can shut me down at the push of a button somewhere. And you won't be able to get your cash to buy your stuff. What did John say? He said there's coming a time when you will not be able to buy or sell unless you toe the line, in this case, the mark of the beast you receive. Well, understand what the mark of the beast is. You need to understand that. We must be able to understand it. John talked about it in the book of Revelation. It's coming, and it's fascinating to see how this thing is developing, thanks especially to things like COVID-19 and global climate change stuff. It's interesting the way people are talking, but we'll come to that in the Countdown series. Number 2, the possibility of global economic collapse. Why? Because one group can pull the rest of us down. Has that happened? Yes, it has happened. What about GFC 2008? America caught an economic cold. They sneezed and the rest of the world got the virus, remember? Bailout packages here in Australia. The government gave out $1,000 to everybody, I think it was. I wish I had got my hands on some of it, but anyway, they gave out money to everybody to go spend. Remember that? That happened. Because we're such an interconnected world in a global village, one party can pull the rest of us down, and so on. John talked about a day coming when no business people, they will all weep and mourn because no one buys their stuff anymore, we just read. I tell you, this is clearly not because John's been on mushrooms. We can see very clearly the reality of these things can take place. We're not saying it's here yet. We're saying we have the way to go about this today. What about physical coercion? Is that possible, that they would use physical coercion? Well, if you lived in Nazi Germany or East European communism, you would know all about that, right? We even know about it in the last 3 years, thanks to COVID-19. Now, please, I'm not knocking governments. I believe there were many governments who were trying to protect their citizens, But the reality is governments all over the world made their citizens do things that they didn't want to do, many of them. That's the case. We've seen it. So as I say, I'm certainly not knocking governments for many of them trying to do the right thing, but we were all forced to do stuff. It's very possible for governments to do this today. Lastly, is it realistic that Earth's final events will impact the spiritual sphere or the religious sphere of life, that is worship? Because that's what John says. Is that possible? Wow, we better listen to Sir Arnold J. Toynbee, British historian, trained an Oxford, London University historian. He wrote a mammoth set of books called A Study of History. 21 world civilizations he examined, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Egyptians, and so on. And in his 5th volume, he asked the question, why did all these civilizations disintegrate and collapse? What led to their downfall? As you read his works, he says something very interesting in his volumes. The fundamental conflict is not political, but religious. The line cuts across the inward spiritual world within every living soul today. Everyone has an opinion, spiritually speaking, he's sort of saying. Within every living soul today, whatever label of political citizenship may have been stamped on its body by the accident of birth, the fundamental conflict's not political, religious undertones are in there as well. Is that true? Look at the recent international conflicts in our world in just our lifetime. Have a look at it. Northern Ireland, what was that about? Catholic versus Protestant. Let's go somewhere else. Let's go to Bosnia, Serbia and Croatia back in the early 1990s. Muslims, Orthodox Christians and Catholic Christians. Let's go a little further. How about terrorism? Usually it's fundamentalist Muslims, but they're not the only terrorists. Fundamentalist Hindus, fundamentalist Christians even have committed terror and so on. Possible for them to do it. How about in Kashmir, near the Himalayas? Muslims versus Hindus. Underneath it, there's this stuff going on. And then what about the Middle East? Israel and the Middle East. What keeps fueling that thing? Number one, Orthodox Jews, very extreme Jews. It's one of the reasons and others there, they want to make sure that Israel belongs to Israel and they will take Palestinian land and build homes on it. United States Protestants have a belief that Israel is God's people. They must therefore be defended by the United States of America. I was watching a national television program here a few years ago, and the Premier of New South Wales at the time, Bob Carr, if you remember Bob Carr, well-read man, he was asked the question on this program, what the world thinks of America. And he said, why is it, Mr. Carr, that the United States backs Israel but not the Palestinians? Oh, that's a no-brainer, he said. US Protestants, they believe Israel, so they pressure their government to back Israel. Of course, there's a strong Jewish lobby. Not only that, the Muslims, of course, that's all in that conflict. Toynbee was right. The fundamental questions is not political but religious, which is exactly what John said in the end of time. That's what's going to happen. You won't be able to buy or sell unless we worship according to what the beast says. Now, as we close and wrap this up today, why these predictions? We've looked at quite a number since the last, the second, third, fourth and fifth program. Why these predictions? Is it to scare us to death or something? What's the purpose? Why these prophecies? Well, let me assure you that they're not about gloom and doom. Many of the predictions made in 2000 and 2012 were about gloom and doom, right? The world's going to go out in a big bang, but this is not the purpose of Bible prophecy. Let me show you, it backs up what Grego told us. Here is a prediction of a prophet, Jeremiah, who lived at the time of the Babylonians. He says these words, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you what? A hope and a future. That's the real purpose of biblical prophecy. Not to harm us, but to help us see what's really happening, to open our eyes, but to see that there is a hope and there is a future. Jesus put it slightly different. He said, I have told you before it comes, I'm making predictions, he says, that when it does come to pass, you may believe. You may know that there is a God out there. By the way, this is one of the key reasons of prophecy, is that God wants us to believe that there is somebody out there. This is actually why I come to share these predictions. I was a 19-year-old medical student. I was wondering, is there anybody out there? Is anybody in control of this thing? And I was searching for answers to these questions. So I went to archaeology and I began to look at what archaeology, and I realised that the Bible is historically accurate. And then I started to look at some of the predictions and I realised someone's behind this stuff. You can't make these predictions again and again and get it right, but someone's giving you some inside information. And so I found that this brought hope. It helps us to believe when we see these predictions. And God says, I want you to believe because I want us to be part of that forever empire, that last empire that never ends with no pain, no suffering and no death. So I trust that you'll be able to join us. Let me just make sure. Have we finished? Yeah, the stone. I think that's it. Oh, there. So we're going to identify these characters in the Countdown series. You'll understand who the dragon is. In fact, we're going to understand what that's all about in the program on Saturday evening when we look at cosmic conspiracy. We're going to understand who that sea beast is, that land beast is. You'll understand all of that during this series. You'll understand what the mark of the beast is, what the 666 thing is, and even things like the Battle of Armageddon. Hollywood has a version of that. Well, Hollywood never gets it right, but they use biblical terms to make a good movie or a bad movie, whatever it is. You're going to enjoy this. Your eyes will be open. But let me tell you, this is what you'll find. You'll find increased meaning and purpose in life, a hope for the future, and you'll be able to face the future with absolute confidence. That's what you get out of these incredible books, Daniel and the Revelation. I think we should just pause for a moment of prayer and thank God for what he's left with us. Let's best bow together. Father, we want to thank you that we're not left to drift along through a vast sea of time and eternity with nothing in the future. We thank you there is hope. We thank you for this book that is true, it's dependable, there is substance under our feet, there is a confidence that we can have. Help us as we seek to understand these things and to know what's coming. Give us your hope in Jesus' name. Amen.